lawmakers get a break in their fight to stay in the U.S. Good evening. This is CTV News for Wednesday, January 10th. I'm Patricia Vallone.
And I'm Byron Scott. Glad to have you with us tonight. That story shortly, but first it is back to work for the Maryland General Assembly. Lawmakers returning to the House and Senate chambers for the start of the 2018 session. It was all smiles as legislators filled the hallways of the State House prior to session. Now, this promises to be a busy 90 days. Among the items facing lawmakers, a possible override of the governor's veto of a paid sick leave bill. Members also say health care is a top priority in light of the new tax law, which, among other things, eliminates the insurance mandate under Obamacare. CTV spoke with legislators to get their take on this upcoming new session.
Healthcare is going to be a big topic this session with everything going on federally. We got to make sure that everyone has access to adequate health care.
I think the marijuana issue is going to be a big deal, and I think the rollback of taxes is going to be very interesting.
The governor also talked about term limits, and also live streaming sessions. What are your thoughts about that?
I have never been in favor of term limits. Term limits we already have in place. It's called voting. Voting is term limits by definition.
It's going to be a tumultuous session. With the election coming up, it's just going to be a long and arduous 90 days. I think everybody is posturing for a campaign, and I think we're going to spend a lot of time on foolishness without getting down to what we really need to do, which is try to help the people of Maryland. I mean, that's what should be preeminent in all of our minds. But people are thinking about a June primary and a November general, and they're not thinking about the people of Maryland.
The 438th session goes through April 9th. And the Legislative Black Caucus held a news conference to draw attention to its agenda moving into the new session. The big items on this priority list include a variety of issues like diversity in the state's medical marijuana industry and health care.
This is a very important year for us. Our number one issue is always HBCUs, and then you got to look at what we've been fighting for since last year, and that's medical cannabis. I think we're making some tremendous strides this year. We've already got a commitment from leadership where it's going to be Senate Bill number 1 and House Bill number 2. So we're excited about that and our posturing and our position for that. From the Black Caucus, we're still looking at prescription drug gouging that we need to really get our hands wrapped around. And then there's some other criminal justice bills that we're going to be concentrating on as well.
And the Black Caucus plans to meet with Governor Larry Hogan tomorrow over breakfast to talk about its priorities.
Well, two leading state Democrats are pushing to put a lockbox on Maryland's casino revenue. Senator Joan Carter Conway and Delegate Maggie McIntosh plan to introduce a constitutional amendment on this issue. Instead of having the money go into a general fund, it would be dedicated only to education. Maryland's casinos brought in $1.4 billion in revenue last year. Senate President Mike Miller commented on this issue.
I brought MGM to Prince George's County, and I supported gambling with the idea that the money was going to go to education. We sold it in that regard. Governors had to dip into the money because of the economic crisis we've gone through. But now that we're out of that, supposedly, we can put money where it's supposed to go, not just education, but educational enhancement.
Now, McIntosh hopes the legislation would put the amendment on the ballot in 2018. Well, Senate President Mike Miller says he'll refer federal charges that are facing Baltimore City Senator to the General Assembly Ethics Committee when it convenes next week. The move comes after Maryland's Republican Party called on Miller to oust Senator Nathaniel Oakes from office. Oakes was indicted on fraud charges near the end of last year's session, accused of using his position to help a phony real estate development in exchange for thousands of dollars in bribes. The senator could be reprimanded, censored, or expelled by the ethics panel, measures that the full Senate must approve. Meantime, his federal trial is scheduled for later this year.
After months of anguish, DACA supporters get some relief, at least for now. A federal judge has blocked the Trump administration's attempt to end the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program. The move comes as California and other states are suing the government to keep DACA in place. It protects 800,000 young immigrants brought to this country by their parents from being deported. Last September, President Trump decided to end it. In response to the judge's decision, the president tweeted that the court system is broken and, he says, unfair. air.
Well, could Marylanders lose their right to vote simply because they skipped voting for a few years? The Supreme Court pondered this question today in the Ohio case of Husted versus A. Philip Randolph. The 6th U.S. Court of Appeals blocked Ohio from removing a man from the rolls because he had not voted in 5 years. While lawyers for Ohio argued that the law should be reinstated, voting rights advocates charged that this is another effort by Republicans to suppress votes.
Is an extraordinary step to try to knock off, for example, in Cuyahoga County in Ohio, which is Cleveland, 40,000 voters. That's ridiculous. That is nothing but a blatant attempt to knock people off the voting rolls. And we want people to be connected to their government. We want them to participate in their government. And this is an attempt to continue to disconnect people from what's going on in their country.
When I think about the fact that it was 54 years ago that we had Bloody Sunday, people like foot soldiers like John Lewis, our beloved John Lewis colleague, fought, died, and so many bled on that bridge for the right to vote. And here we are now in 2018, and we're still fighting to make sure that every American has the right to vote. It is, to me, the most precious and most fundamental constitutional right that we have. And it's so important that we make sure that everyone who is eligible to vote has a right to vote.
Now, Sewell is the first African American ever elected from Selma, Alabama.